evening, everybody. My name is Mike Ferris. I am the director of the Convention of States Project. Welcome to our broadcast. It is good to see, at least see a little number down the corner indicating that there are a lot of people watching. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. I am very grateful that you would choose to spend time tonight to learn how you can better save the country. There is someplace on this screen the ability to ask me questions by typing them in, and what I will do is several points during the conversation tonight. I will restate the fact that there's an opportunity to ask questions, and I will also be answering questions. I might answer questions on the fly, but after we've talked a while, I certainly will answer questions in a steady fashion after about probably 25-30 minutes into our time together tonight. I plan on going exactly 1 hour, and we will finish this right at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock Eastern time. The issues that we're going to cover will obviously be about the constitutional issues relative to Article 5, what we hope to accomplish, and something about my background. So I'm going to begin by just telling you a little bit about my background in this issue. Many of you may know that I am the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I founded that organization about 31 years ago. I'm also the founder and chancellor of Patrick Henry College, where I teach constitutional law and coach our moot court team that is the national champion, defending national champion. In fact, we've won the last 6 national championships in a row, and won 8 out of the last 10. So what that is, I train young people in how to argue for the Constitution in front of a pretend case that is in front of the supposed Supreme Court of the United States. It's a way to get them ready for law school. It's a way to get them ready to be champions of justice for the principles of the original meaning of the Constitution, for liberty. And the motto of Patrick Henry College, of course, is for Christ and for liberty. So, but my own personal background as a litigator includes the background of having litigated an Article 5 case in the late 1970s. It went on into the early 1980s when Congress purported to change the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And we worked together with legislators from Idaho and Arizona. I represented legislators from Washington State, and we litigated the issue of whether or not Congress could change the rules for the ratification of a constitutional amendment under Article 5 in the middle of the process. And the holding of that case was, no, Congress cannot change the rules. The rules, once started, stay the rules throughout the process, which is an important thing to know about Article 5 as a general principle, that the rules are not subject to manipulation, and you can go to court and you can win, and there are other checks and balances as well. So I have been a student of Article 5 for a long time. I've taught constitutional law for a long time to high school students online for about 20 years. I've taught at the collegiate level for 15 years. And so this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And the best way to perhaps assess the problem that we are facing is the founders understood that there are 3 aspects of good government. We needed to have good people in office, good candidates, good elected officials, and people that had good principles, good values. They were experienced, they were people of integrity. So good people was one aspect of what made good government in the minds of the founders. The second thing is we need to have good policy. Today, good policy would touch on issues like immigration and healthcare and lowering the size of the federal government and making sure that we balance our budget and things like that. Those are policy issues. But the thing that the founders thought was the most important to the preservation of freedom was to make sure that we have good structure. Good structure includes checks and balances, limited power, enumerated powers, adhering to the forms of the Constitution, and federalism, making sure that the states retain their power. And what the Convention of the States process is designed to do is to bring back good structure. essentially the exact same structure that the founders intended to give us, but a re-implementation of federalism, where we take away the power of the president to unilaterally legislate, where we require Congress to stick to its enumerated powers and not pretend that it has the power to legislate on any and all matters. And so these are the kinds of things that can and will be addressed by our Convention of the States application. So with that kind of background, I want to jump into what we promised that we would talk to you about, and that is how we can make this happen this year. When we originally started this project, the legislative array of state legislatures was not as favorable as it is after this last election. And so we believe that it's essential that we take advantage of the opportunity that this historic 2014 election has given us. We don't believe that the change of power in Washington, D.C. is meaningful in terms of structural changes. Washington, D.C. will still not give up its power. But the fact that there's been a historic conservative shift in state legislatures does give us an opportunity that we think is critical for the future of the country. And it is this opportunity that is important for us. And because of this opportunity, it is our goal right now to try to get to the 34 states, to make a very serious effort. And our goal, we're bound and determined to get 34 states in 2015. Now, we had 3 states last year meaning 2014, pass our application. Georgia, Florida, and Alaska passed the application asking for a convention of the states for the purpose of imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and imposing term limits on federal officials. And the term limits issue is not just members of Congress, where a term limits amendment could be proposed, but also members of the judiciary. We could have, for the first time, term limits on the federal judges, which it would be great because we have no ability right now to get rid of federal judges. We can, at least in theory, get rid of congressmen by voting the rascals out of office. From my personal perspective, getting checks and balances on the federal judiciary is actually the most important thing we need to be doing in the Convention of the States process. So the current array of state legislatures is this. There are only 11 states where the Democrats control both houses of the state legislature. 11. Now, let me pause and say, our Convention of the States application should not be a partisan issue. It should be that Democrats and conservatives alike, or Democrats and Republicans alike, I wish all Republicans were conservative, but not all of them are. So Democrats and Republicans alike in state legislatures should agree on one thing, and that is it is better to make policy decisions at the state level than at the national level on most domestic issues, education issues, healthcare issues, many, many other issues. For example, Washington State, which is a state that's split between Republicans controlling one house and Democrats controlling the other house. The Environmental Protection Agency has come up with absurd rules on because Washington State people tend to eat a lot of fish, so they're punishing Washington State residents with higher than normal mercury discharge levels because they eat a lot of fish. And as a result of that, the biggest employer in the state, Boeing Airplane Company, is being threatened with closure by excessive rules from the federal government. Washington State legislature, we believe, can effectively control the environment, have good clean water in Washington State. A similar issue in Maine. Maine has a Democrat House and a Republican Senate, and there the Environmental Protection Agency is clamping down on wood stoves, which are essential to life in Maine for many, many families. And so we believe that there is a host of issues that cross bipartisan lines, and this should not be a partisan issue. I want to really emphasize that. Nonetheless, I've been around politics a long time, for well over 30 years. I've been engaged in this for working on state legislative issues, mainly for homeschooling and parents' rights, that I know it is, unfortunately, more partisan than it should be. So when we shifted to the Republican control of so many legislators, legislatures, that was something we had to take note of. So today, 31 states, both houses are controlled by the Republicans. And 11 states, both houses are controlled by the Democrats. And that means there are 8 states where the Republicans control one house and the Democrats control the other. Now, in that checklist I just given you, I have counted Nebraska as a Republican state. Now, Nebraska is unique in 2 ways. First, their legislature is nonpartisan, and secondly, they only have one house. They call their members of their unicameral senators. But the accepted view of Nebraska is that it's really a Republican state. So we're counting Nebraska as a state controlled completely by Republicans in that count that I've just given you. And so if we can get all the Republican states, now we already have 3 states, Georgia, Florida, and Alaska. If we can get the 28 remaining states controlled by both houses that are Republican, that brings us to 31 states, which means we only need 3 states that where there's a split legislature, where we have one House Republican and one House Democrat, to be able to get this to 34 states this year in 2015. So this is a historic opportunity. In fact, we don't really even need any democratically controlled states to get to ratification. There are 39 states right now where the Republicans control at least one house of the state legislature. So we're at a historic opportunity to do some good things. Now, some people will say correctly that Republicans in the state legislature on some issues are not all that conservative and not all that constitutional in their orientation. We don't need everybody to be constitutional about everything and to be perfectly conservative about everything, because it's really a one focused topic that we're concerned about, and that is, how should we allocate power? Should there be more power at the state level, or should there be more power remaining at the federal level? And on that issue, I would submit to you that Democrats and Republicans in the state legislatures are more conservative on that issue than anybody in Congress, or almost anyone in Congress. And certainly the majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats in Congress are going to be more in favor of strong federal power than would be the state legislatures. By the way, this was done by the founders on purpose. They wanted the interests of the states to be pitted against the self-interest of Washington, so that the rights of the people would be safe when one level of government fights another level of government for control. Now, why it's good for the people to have this at the state legislature, here's a quick answer. Try getting a personal meeting with your U.S. senator. It's really, really hard. Try getting a meeting with your state senator. That's pretty easy to do. The fewer people that a legislator represents, the more readily available that leader is to the people in their district. The less likely it is for big donors from other states to be interested in buying their affections. The U.S. Senate does not represent the people of their state. The U.S. Senate represents the big dollar donors from around the country. And the reason they do so is because there's money to be made from the federal government. There's money to be made in fiddling with the tax laws. There's money to be made with handing out benefits. There's money to be made in contracts from the government. There's money to be made in multiple ways from the federal government. But if those issues are transferred to the states, that money control of power in Washington, D.C. will be dissipated dramatically. And that will do more to take improper money out of politics than any other particular thing that we can possibly do. Change the spending authority back to the states, and the power will be dissolved and dispersed, and we will have a much more free country where average citizens will have more say than the super wealthy unions and corporations and other people that try to control power for their own benefit. So we are at a historic moment, and now is the time that we can and need to act. So that's why we think this year is the year to make history. The plan to do this requires us to have legislation that would advance our application introduced in at least 31 states, but perhaps as many as 36 states. We currently have prime sponsors ready to go in approximately 29 states. Now that number changes a little each day. We had North Dakota was added today. We've had some other sponsors that are considering it. So the number is not quite nailed down, but it's approximately, in round numbers, we're at about 30 states right now where we have a prime sponsor, at least one house of the legislature. You don't have to have both houses to get going. Just one house is sufficient. So we've got approximately 30 states lined up ready to go, and we are continuing to add a few states here and there until we get to a sufficient number that we have an opportunity to get to 34 states in 2015. Now, the basic game plan is very simple. If there's enough grassroots pressure placed on members of the legislature in each state, then we're going to get a vote, and we're going to be successful on that vote. From the very beginning, our formula is this. There are 4,000 state house legislative districts in the 40 most conservative states. Now, 39 of those states have at least one house that's Republican. So my calculation of 40, where I began this effort about a year and a half ago, I kind of penciled in the 40 states that I thought were the most likely. Well, 39 of them now are in a really good position. So in those 40 states, there are 4,000 state house districts. Our goal is to have a district captain in 75% of those districts. That's 3,000 district captains that we need in the country. I'm going to talk more about district captains a little later. Then each of the districts where we have a district captain, we want to have a minimum of 100 volunteers in that district. And the volunteers are basically just making two promises. That I'm going to call my state legislator and urge him or her to adopt a convention of the states. And you said emails, you can show up in person. But I'm going to contact my state legislator and say, we want a convention of the states. But the second promise is, I'm going to contact my state senator and say, we want a convention of the states. Because those are the only people that matter. Your governor doesn't matter. Your congressman doesn't matter. The president doesn't matter. Supreme Court doesn't matter. MSNBC doesn't matter. All that matters is your state legislator. So we need basically people to make two contacts. Now, they may have to call people a couple of 3 times, but the basic action item here is if we have enough citizens who give us 30 minutes of their time sometime in the next 6 months, we can get this done. And enough citizens is 100 in 75% of the districts. Now, when you do the math out, that's just 300,000 people nationally. That is a 1/10 of 1% of the American population. Now, there's some legislators that are a little tougher to crack. And if we find out who those people are, our goal is to find 1,000 people in those districts. That's just 1% of the people in the country. If we have 3 million people, that multiply out the number of districts by 1,000 people, that's 3 million, which is approximately 1% of the American public. These numbers are very realistic to obtain, and they are unheard of in state legislative circles. This last year, I was down in the Virginia State Capitol talking to the Speaker of the House, and he told me that there was a member of the House who was complaining about how many calls he had gotten on a particular issue. And he said, well, how many calls do you actually get? And he said, 6 calls. Now, that was a lot of calls on an issue, and it is virtually unheard of to get 100 calls. It is unheard of to get 1,000. And if we can get someplace between those numbers, the best way to say it is this. If we get 100 calls in 75% of the districts, it is entirely probable we'll win. If we get 1,000 calls in those districts, 1% of the population, I guarantee you we'll win, and we'll win this year. And so the real effort here needs to be placed into finding grassroots participants. And, you know, I can do it. Mark Meckler, our president of Citizens for Self-Governance, can do it. You know, we have full-time staff that can do it. But we're just human beings. We have, you know, we have megaphones at times, we have microphones at times, we've got resources at times, but it's not going to get done from on high. This has got to be done by a grassroots effort. If we don't have people like you that are on this video tonight, who will in turn go recruit 5 and 10 and 20 people to help us, we're not going to get this done. And so it is entirely a question of how many people in America want freedom enough, want to preserve real checks and balances on the federal government, that they're willing to invest 30 minutes of time in the next 6 months. Now, for the people who are going to help us, who are going to be the district captains, you need to invest a little bit more than that. If you can give us 2 or 3 hours a week for the next 6 months, then we can get this done together. We need district captains who will help us find people. And there are many ways you can find people. We'll talk about that you know, a little more in just a couple of minutes. But we have extremely good networking tools, that a program called Nation Builder. It took us a while to get this in place, but boy, is it a slick system right now that our district captains have access to, our state leaders have access to. There are a couple of state legislative and district positions and coalition positions that we need filled. If you're watching this tonight and you would like to be a state leader, and if we don't have one in your state, I'm not going to be able to go through the list of states and tell you which is which. But if you'd like to be considered for a state leader, and there we need a fair amount of volunteer activity, probably in the neighborhood of about 10 to 15 hours a week, you should be thinking about if you want to be a state level leader. And so we need people. And you know, a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, when we were actually at an event with Mark Levin, said, you know, what would the government be like if the United States Senate always passed every bill sent them by the House? In other words, kind of acted like the House of Lords in Britain, and they were just a, you know, a club, and really were not a serious legislative chamber. Well, what would happen is self-evident. The House would control everything. And then he said, what would happen if no president of the United States ever vetoed legislation? Well, what would happen is you'd have an imbalance of power, and Congress would control everything without any consideration of the views of the president. And they said, what would happen to our country if the state legislatures never used their power to check the federal government using Article 5? The answer is, well, we haven't used this power. And as a result of that, we've never checked the runaway federal government. And the situation that we're in today is because our state legislators have effectively violated their oath of office, because they have said that they're going to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I would tell you that the power cabal in Washington, D.C. is a functional enemy of the Constitution as it is written. By abusing its authority, by abusing the General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, executive power, judicial power, by improperly using international law to control the domestic policy of the United States, by judges writing law for themselves, we are faced with Washington, D.C. It is completely fair and even-handed to say they have become functional enemies of the Constitution as it is written. And it is the duty of state legislators to check that abuse of power. And it is the duty of citizens to make sure that our state legislators carry out their duty. Our duty is to encourage and make sure the state legislators perform their duty and check the abuse of power by Washington, D.C. It is our only hope. It's the hope that's in the Constitution. So if you go to our website, if you haven't signed our petition, for heaven's sake, sign the petition. What the petition does is simply this. The petition sends an automated email to your state senator and your state legislator. That is, if you fill the petition out completely and you give us your address. And so it doesn't really do a lot of good to just give us your name if we don't have the ability to send that message to your state legislator. then you're on our email list, and when the votes are coming up in your state legislature, in committee, on the floor of the House, in committee in the Senate, on the floor of the Senate, we can alert you that these votes are coming. We'll ask you another time to call either your House member or your senator, depending on which branch of the legislature is voting. So that's the participation that we need. District captains help us find people. Individuals call their legislator. State coordinators help us do all these things. That's the kind of participation we need. And whether we're going to have a free country or not really depends on your willingness to help us spread the word. So I'm really glad that so many of you are on board here tonight. And I'm going to now look over here to the side of the screen and start taking your questions. Bob asked, how do we get Jim DeMint and Heritage on board? I went and had a face-to-face visit with Jim DeMint about a year ago. He was very interested in that. There have been many other contacts with Heritage, and they're still not committed to it, but I know that Jim DeMint's instincts are in our direction. In fact, I'll just tell you, I was going in at a time where I was still deciding whether I was going to lead this project or I was going to run for the U.S. Senate in Virginia. And Jim DeMint's answer to me was, Mike, this project is more important than you being in the U.S. Senate. And, even though he thought I would be a good senator, I think I would have been a good U.S. senator from Virginia as well. Nonetheless, I do believe that this project is far more important and is a much better way to check the imbalance of power in the federal government than even electing good conservatives to the U.S. Senate. So, Bob, thanks for that question. Now we're going to go down to, is there a plan for educating the public via commercial, radio, and television ads and promotion to the major media? Well, we are doing our best to do earned media through news interviews and radio interviews and the like. Buying ads on television will require a whole lot more money than we have. Now, we, by a long ways, are the biggest and best funded Article 5 activity, but we are nowhere near the amount of tens of millions of dollars that it will take to be able to do television ads at this point in time. We'd like to do that, and if any of you listening have those kind of resources, please let us know. We'd like to do it. And if you can help us, if people start sending us money, if 100,000 people sending us $100, we'd be on television in a heartbeat. So that's something we'd like to do, but it's not something that we have the capacity to do right at this minute. We've got earned media opportunities, and we're continuing to do that. The next question is, can you address a frequent objection that, this is from a state legislator friend of mine, Frank Edelblue in New Hampshire. And Frank says, can you address a frequent objection I hear regarding a runaway convention that could end poorly for liberty? Certainly. We have, by the way, we have a lot of material about this on our website, but let me give you just the basics. The basics are this. The process is designed to prevent a runaway convention. And realistically, the checks and balances are in place, make the prospect of a runaway convention so remote that it's really fair to say, how likely is it that President Obama will appoint me to the next vacancy on the Supreme Court? Now, I'm fully qualified to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. And any presidential candidates that are listening who want to appoint me to the Supreme Court in the next 2016, I'd be glad to be considered for the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, the left is not going around wringing its hands saying, oh my goodness, we ought to abolish the Supreme Court. We ought not to do this anymore because this conservative guy, Mike Farris, is so conservative. We can't have him on the Supreme Court. He'll undo all the stuff that we've accomplished through the runaway court in the last 30 years. Okay, they aren't running around with those kind of fears because they can count votes. They know that the chances of President Obama doing that are zero. The chances, even if there is a conservative president in 2016 who would dare to appoint me, the chances of me getting past a filibuster in the United States Senate are zero, and they all know it. They're not afraid of that. because they can count votes and they breathe political reality. When we just look at politics in that same way and look at the structure of the Constitution, we can reach the same conclusions about this convention. 34 states set the agenda. And when the agenda is set, that's it. How do I know that? There are two ways I know that. Number one, there have been 400 applications in the history of the Republic. We've never had a convention, even though we're way more than 34. Why have we not had a convention? We've not had a convention because there's not been an agreement on the subject matter. You cannot have a convention until the agenda is set by the states agreeing on the subject matter. That's what's got to happen. That's why we have to get 34 on the same subject matter. And so the number two reason that I know that that's the case is I litigated the case that set the rule that says you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. And so if you have to have agreement on the agenda start and you have the rule you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream, you add those two things together and you know that it's impossible to legally change the rules in the middle of the stream. The agenda will be the agenda that you start with. Well, there's a third, actually, check and balance on that, and that's the votes. It's one state, one vote. 31 states are controlled both houses by Republicans. 8 states now are controlled by one house Republican, one house Democrat. So let's just assume for the sake of discussion that every Democrat, every place is going to vote for some runaway idea, which I think is absurd. I don't think it's fair to Democrats. But let's add a few crazy Republicans into the mix. You've got to get every single one of the 11 Democrat states, plus every single one of the split states where the Republicans have an equal voice in the process. That gets you to just 19. You've got to get 7 more wholly controlled Republican states just to make a proposal, not to ratify it, just to make a proposal. Anybody that can count votes says that scenario is impossible. But the final reason that we know it's impossible is you got to ratify it. 38 states have to ratify. Now, when a state, let's take Washington State as an example. If the state Senate votes to ratify and the state House votes to reject a proposed amendment, the amendment's rejected because it takes both houses to ratify, one house to reject, which means if just one house rejects in 13 states, then an amendment doesn't get passed. It is impossible. In fact, this math is the only reason that Congress has not already proposed dramatic reductions in our Second Amendment rights, is because they're not willing to spend political capital on something that they know is a political dead letter. It can never possibly get ratified. All they do is make people mad at them and they get nothing for their trouble. And so the idea that something can get through this maze in a runaway fashion just requires you to suspend political reality and start being afraid of, things that are absolutely politically impossible. Again, they're the political equivalent of the left wing being fearful that President Obama is going to appoint Mike Farris to the Supreme Court. It is just nonsense. So please, go to our web if you would like more information. Another person asks, how will we compel states like Virginia to vote for the Convention of States when they already declined to in a previous legislative session? They said multiple sessions. The question is actually just one. Last year, Virginia was the only state that on a floor vote rejected the Convention of the States, whereas 3 states passed it in the first state. Also, Arizona and Alabama passed it in the House, and it just stalled out and didn't get a vote in the Senate just because of ran out of time in Alabama. And in Arizona, we had a roadblock in the Senate president who didn't want to take a vote. And so that was a problem we're working on for this next year. But so we've only had one failed vote. It was relatively close in the Virginia House. But the basic answer is I got from a number of state legislators is that the Democrats controlled the Virginia Senate last year. The Republicans now control the Virginia House, and the Republican legislators that voted no on this, many of them told me they didn't want to offend the naysayers for something that they knew was going to die in the Virginia Senate when the Democrats controlled it. And that was a fair assessment, that the Democrats in the Virginia Senate would have killed it. And so they were, I don't agree with these people, obviously. I think they're gutless to take that position, but nonetheless, it makes sense to me. It's logical use of political capital and so on. And I know that we've already converted a number of those people to our side, and I am confident that we have an excellent chance in the Senate. And I guarantee you, if we get this through the Virginia Senate, we're going to go to the Virginia Senate first. If we get this through the Virginia Senate, it will pass in the Virginia House of Representatives. I'm absolutely confident of that and have good inside reasons to believe that that is exactly what's going to happen. So the next question is, let's see if I can use this computer. This is not my own computer. I'm doing my best here, folks. I'm a one-man show tonight. Does Article 5 allow for the repeal of existing constitutional amendments? Absolutely, it does. And I want to repeal the 16th Amendment on income tax. I'd like to see it replaced with either a flat tax or perhaps a national sales tax with an absolute limit on it. And the procedural rule that we need to have is there needs to be a supermajority. One of the things that would be great to have is a sunset provision that all federal fees and taxes of all kinds are repealed, let's say 2 years after the date of ratification. And then there would be a requirement of a 60% majority to enact any new taxes. Those kind of procedural protections are what we're going to need to protect liberty. And absolutely, we could repeal the 16th Amendment, we could repeal the 17th Amendment, but we could only repeal amendments that deal with the subjects that are in our application, which are imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and imposing term limits on federal officials. So there would have to be a correlation to those topics. So the Bill of Rights, for example, can't be amended or repealed by our effort. If somebody put in an application to say, we want to repeal the Third Amendment, for example, well, if you got 34 states who wanted to have a convention to repeal the Third Amendment, that is theoretically possible. Nobody's asking for such a convention. There is a left of center group called Wolfpack that's seeking to have a convention, which I think is seeking to repeal one of the provisions of the First Amendment by reversing Citizens United. But there's no chance whatsoever that they're going to get 34 states for that effort. And they can go out and do what they want to do. I can do the math on that side as well, and it's not going to be successful. But if they could get 34 states, then they could have it. But they can't get their subject talked at our convention, at least not the way they're trying to do it. I suppose there would be some way to limit federal power, but not limit our constitutional rights in that scenario. So the next question is, how do we address those who believe that George Soros is a major player behind the COS project and he's providing financing for it? I really wish somebody would say this out loud, because it would be a great fundraising technique, because I could sue them for defamation. It's just a flat lie. I mean, I'm teasing about suing them for defamation, except because I'm too busy to mess with it, but it is defamation. It is just simply not true. And people who say such things, should be disbelieved about everything they say. George Soros has not given us a single nickel, nor I don't know of any money whatsoever that's come from any left-wing sources. I don't do the fundraising, I don't see the checks, but I have been assured by Mark Meckler that he knows who does the fundraising, that this is people who are conservative patriots who believe in this country. We don't have major gifts from known conservative, sources or anything like that. It's just, normal people who believe in the freedom of this country that have been helping us financially, and George Soros is not involved. Now, here's the little element of truth that people have perverted into a lie. The little element of truth is that left-wing groups of the kind that George Soros often supports, they believe in using Article 5 for their purposes. Wolfpack, for example, is the kind of group that George Soros supports. And I don't know whether George Soros has given Wolfpack any money directly or not. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But that's the kind of organization that George Soros supports. And so, but that's their effort. George Soros also funds liberal candidates for the U.S. Senate. And we don't go around saying to conservative candidates for the U.S. Senate, well, George Soros is giving money to candidates for the Senate, so since you're a candidate for the Senate, he must be giving money to you. Well, that's nonsense, and everybody knows it. Just because people are, two people running for the Senate, they aren't getting money from the same sources necessarily. Two people trying to use Article 5, which is just a political process that's listed in the Constitution, they don't necessarily get money from the same sources. And I guarantee you, we are not getting money from the same sources as Wolfpack. George Soros is not giving us some money. And if you find people who are doing that, we will send them letters to cease and desist. They're flat out lies. Okay, let me go down to the next question. What's the strategy when we encounter a powerful state legislator who's dug in opposition? For example, Andy Biggs in Arizona. Well, the biggest answer is people. If we put enough people from Andy Biggs' district pressuring Andy, that's step one. If we put enough people pressuring the other senators in Arizona, for example, in Arizona, there's a discharge petition process. If we get enough senators in Arizona to sign a discharge petition, the measure gets voted on the floor of the Arizona legislature, whether Andy Biggs likes it or not. And so that's our goal. If we just have enough people to say, yes, I want to vote on this, we're hoping that we can get some Democrats who might vote against us on the floor, but who just want to embarrass Andy Biggs, who will sign a discharge petition. Because it is not fair for one person to use abuse their power to not let something come to a vote. If Andy Biggs wants to vote no on this, let him vote no. But he is not acting appropriately when he blocks the people from having an opportunity to vote on something this important. And so we need people. People are the answer to any legislative roadblock. You get enough people in Arizona raising a hue and cry that they want an Article 5 convention, it's going to happen in Arizona this year, and that is our game plan, and that's what we're going to do this year. Person asks, I assume that California is hopeless. How can those of us who live here make a difference? Not 100% sure California is hopeless. I'm 95% sure that California is hopeless. At least this year, it's not in our states that we're planning for. It's not in the 39 states that we're planning. But nonetheless, we're working on getting a prime sponsor in California. And so getting district captains in California is still a good idea, and building for the future, because California will come into play in the ratification debate. So it's time to go ahead and build those districts out in California for when we get to the ratification stage of this. Now, but what you can do, what everybody can do, is cross state lines by telling your friends. Because you're using this service, I know that you're internet savvy. So you're on Facebook, you're probably on Twitter and Pinterest and other things that I just don't understand, and Twitter. I use Facebook a lot, but the other stuff I don't understand exactly. But many of you do. Use your networks to tell your friends to get on board. You don't have to be a district captain. You don't have to do anything formal. Just go recruit your friends. And if you live in California, you're going to have friends other places. If you live in Arkansas, you're going to have friends other places. Every one of you have got friends across state lines. Help us find your friends and get them linked into us so that we can build this to a mechanism that will work. Let's see. Okay, the Congressional Research Service published a report in 2014 suggesting Congress will decide the delegates in the convention. What authority does this document carry? And somebody posted another question in that last one. What authority does this document carry? And the answer is none, zero. The people who wrote that don't know what they're talking about. Young lawyers who get a job at Congress, write these things. It's a Congressional Research Service, and you know, it's really a simple argument to answer. The evidence that they have for Congress claiming the authority to name delegates and otherwise control the convention process is they look at a bunch of bills that have been introduced in Congress, and every single one of these bills has failed. And I can tell you this, the only way you determine what the will of Congress is by bills that have passed. Bills that fail never determine the will of Congress, except in this sense. The Supreme Court, in a case from the Korean War era, where Youngstown Sheehan 2 versus Sawyer is the name of the case, where Congress considered a bill to give the president the power to seize steel mills during wartime, it was during the Korean War, and to stop labor disputes. There was a bill considering giving him the exact power that he used in this case. But the bill failed in Congress. And the Supreme Court said the fact that Congress considered a bill and rejected it is evidence that Congress intended not to give the president such authority. So the precedent that is created, if any, is 100% the opposite of what the Congressional Research Service said. Some young punk lawyer who never litigated an Article 5 case really doesn't know what he or she is talking about said. And so they do not speak for Congress. You know, there are people out there, you know, gadfly blogger types claiming to be lawyers who've trumpeted this thing that have never litigated a reported case in court, who trumpets this. All it shows is they don't know what they're talking about. So anyhow, that's an answer to that. Are we on a path to hold the amending convention of states by 2016? Yes, we are. And if we get to 34 states this year, we will hold the convention in 2016. It's possible it could start in late 2015, but I think it's much more likely it will start in January or February of 2016. Now, of course, it's possible that despite our best efforts, we spill over a year. No, we're not going to give up if we fall a couple of states short this year, or even if we fall more than a couple of states short. We're not going to give up. But nonetheless, it is our goal. It is our objective. We are going to do it. This is a historic moment, and we need to seize the day. So we've got our pedal to the metal. We got our ears back against our head, and pick your metaphor. We are going hard as we possibly can, and we need you to join us with that level of intensity to make sure that we use this historic moment and we use Article 5 to save this country and to preserve our liberty. So that's the answer to that question. There was a question on how can we promote COS as being nonpartisan and ensure that we don't polarize an automatic negative response. I think that you have to pick the audience where you're talking to about this, but the basic answer is this. If you go to a town hall meeting in Berkeley, California, and you ask the people in Berkeley, who should decide your healthcare policy for Berkeley? Should people in Berkeley decide it? People in Sacramento decide it? Or people in Washington, D.C. decide it? The people in Berkeley, the vast majority will say, no, we should decide it here in Berkeley. The second most popular will be, well, Sacramento should decide it for the state because it's more realistic. Virtually no one will say, really Washington, D.C. should decide the healthcare policy for Berkeley. That's just not going to be a very popular choice. That's the issue we're talking about. When we're talking about structural change of government, we are not going to be dictating the policy that follows. All that will result in this is who gets to decide. Who decides the education issue? Who decides the welfare issue? Who decides whether we have a law? The president acting by himself, or do we require Congress to actually pass a law? Those are not conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican issues. If people would just step back and think about it for a minute. It really is a question of who decides. And if California gets freedom to do what it wants completely with no overlay of the federal government, the federal government's going into a more conservative period right now. Washington, D.C. may actually be more conservative in some respects than Sacramento. Well, let Sacramento be Sacramento. Let Boston be Boston. Let Boise be Boise. And let Little Rock be Little Rock. There are more conservative places, there are more liberal places. Every state can find its own place, and we'll see which philosophy works best for each state. And that's what freedom's all about. That's what this grand experiment called the laboratories of democracy that the states were intended to be. And that's the basic message that we think is important to make it nonpartisan as best we can. Let's see. When a legislator tells you that they support Article 5, yet they support a limited approach, balanced budget amendment, versus the three-pronged approach of the Convention of the States, what's the response? Now, we have a document that answers this specifically, and that I'm 99% sure that it's on our website. If not, I will make sure that it's on our website. I hope I didn't just disconnect something. My foot hit something. I hope it was just the power switch. I think it was. I think we're okay. Sorry about that. And so I lost my train of thought by pulling the power switch. Oh boy, I really have lost the question. Sorry. And because questions keep getting posted, they are scrolling across my screen. This is the point to tell you that I really am 63 years old, and I'm a grandfather of 17, and I'm doing my best to remember these things, and I apologize. I have lost it. So I will try to find it again. Oh, there it is. When a legislator tells you that they support Article 5. Okay. So the basic answer is a balanced budget amendment standing by itself can't stop excessive taxes. A balanced budget amendment by itself cannot stop excessive spending. It is possible to balance the budget by keeping on spending like there's no tomorrow and simply raising taxes. Moreover, there's a legal problem with balanced budget amendment. Because they have been written in so many different ways, there's going to be litigation that follows on the issue of aggregation. So whenever they get to 34 states, and my best guess, if you count the aggregation, how many of them really are in agreement on the subject matter, as fairly as possible, they're not at 24 states. They're going to be perhaps as much as 21 states, maybe as low as 17 or 18, but they're not at 24 states right now. But nonetheless, whenever they get to 34 states, however you count it, there's going to be litigation that follows. Whereas our application, the core wording, the wording that needs to match, has been identical in every state, and every state that's ever introduced it, and we've got an agreement from every prime sponsor to keep that language identical. And so the goal, we're not going to have litigation. So one of the reasons, if you want to have a discussion about this and have an Article 5 convention actually get convened, the fastest possible method is to get it through the Convention of the States process. Someone asks if we have a candidate that is a Convention of the States candidate for 2016. The answer is no. Now, there are some people that are running for president that have endorsed the Convention of the States, and I'm happy to tell you that. Well, they haven't said officially they're running for president. They're rumored to be running for president. Bobby Jindal supports the Convention of the States. Mike Huckabee supports the Convention of the States. And there have been some others that have talked about it. John Kasich clearly supports the use of Article 5. He's not officially endorsed the Convention of the States project, although he may do so. We're in discussions about that. The only person running for president that I know of that's rejected it officially is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, when he was a lawyer for the 10th Amendment Center in Texas, strongly supported the use of Article 5 for this purpose, and he tells us out loud that he changed his view simply to appease a political group that was pressuring him when he was running for the Senate in Texas. And so for political purposes, he changed his view on that point. He has not said he changed his mind, he's just changed his politics. So There you go. That's what I know about presidential candidates and 2016. We are not planning to endorse anybody, but we're happy to tell you whether they've endorsed us. The people have asked for a list on the internet of who our state captains are. We found people abusing that list. We did have that up at one point in time. People were abusing that list and harassing our state captains. And so all we ask people to do is send us an email. If you want to know who the state captain is or in your state, just send us an email and we'll get you that information. All right, let's see if I can find other questions I haven't yet addressed. We got 5 more minutes, and I'm just trying to make the screen work here, and we'll see if I can get it to go. All right. What's the most common objection you receive to someone just hearing about the Convention of the States, and how do you overcome it? Well, there are 2 most common. We've already talked about one of them, and one of them is the runaway convention argument, which we addressed pretty much at length. The other one is people will say, well, they don't obey the Constitution right now. Why do you believe that they'll obey the Constitution if we amend it? I get why people think that, but there's actually a more precise way to observe what's going on. Our federal government actually obeys the wrong Constitution because we've effectively acquired 2 constitutions. There's the Constitution as written, and then there's the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And the federal government pretty much accurately obeys the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. It is the problem with our government is the Supreme Court's interpretation does not match the original meaning of the Constitution. It is possible to overturn Supreme Court interpretations. I have done so myself. You know, when I say that, in politics, nobody ever does something by themselves. So when I say that, I don't mean I did it by myself. I was a leader in the movement that did that. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was the bill that Hobby Lobby successfully used to stop Obamacare from forcing them to violate their religious freedom. The Supreme Court, through the First Amendment, traditional view of the free exercise of religion, onto the constitutional trash pile. And a bill was written to reverse the Supreme Court. And that bill was called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I'm the guy who named the bill. There was a general committee running the politics of that bill, and there was a subcommittee of lawyers who drafted the bill. I was the chairman. First, I was the chairman, then I was the co-chairman of the bill of lawyers who drafted the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So I both named the bill and chaired the group who wrote the law. I helped reverse the Supreme Court on the issue of religious freedom. And so it's possible to do that. When we organize correctly, we write laws correctly, we can fix the General Welfare Clause abuse. We can fix the Commerce Clause abuse. We can fix the other abuses of the Supreme Court by clear language. And if we're successful, we are going to put real checks and balances on the Supreme Court to give the ability of the states, for example. I think states should have the power to impeach Supreme Court justices. And I think they should be able to do it for the failure to adhere to the original meaning of the Constitution. Add that in as an explicit ground for impeachment. That would be one way to achieve real checks and balances on the Supreme Court. So there are multiple things we can do to do that, and those are the things that will make it that they will be required to obey the original meaning of the Constitution by clear, plain language. Okay. I see that I have 2 minutes left. So with 2 minutes, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to answer any more questions tonight. We'll do more of these, and we'll be able to answer more questions later. I want to just thank every one of you for being involved here tonight. I need you to get involved in a big way. I need you to sign the petition on our website if you haven't done so already. Please sign it tonight if you haven't already done it. Secondly, if possible, if at all possible, be a district captain. Whether you're a district captain or not, I need you to be a promoter. to tell your friends at church, tell your friends in your neighborhood, tell your friends from your kids' soccer teams, wherever you have people that you're friends with. Tell them about this, link them to our website, get them to get involved. Here's the simple message, the three-part elevator speech. Washington, D.C. is abusing its power. Number two, Washington, D.C. will never stop abusing its power unless it's forced to from the outside. Number three, the founders gave the state legislators the ability to stop the abuse of federal power by writing amendments to the Constitution that are designed to stop federal power abuse. Number four, it's time for the state legislators to do this. If you know those four simple arguments, you know enough to convince anybody it's time for a convention of the states. Tell your friends, pass this word along. Thank you for being here tonight. Please volunteer. When you think of it, please pray for us. Pray for this country. America needs you, needs your participation. This is the greatest country on earth, but it's time for us to live up to our potential and show people how freedom really can be preserved. Thank you for coming tonight. God bless.